Good. Good morning. I don't know how to begin actually, but I think probably what I will talk to you about is my career in the hospitality industry, and just give you a few anecdotes, and maybe something that I say to you will resonate with you or be of some interest. I'm a great fan of the hospitality industry. I've been involved since I was in my early 20s, so it's a long time. And during that time I've been lucky enough to be involved in a restaurant which has done well in Cornwall, and it's expanded, been able to expand the business on the back of the success of the first restaurant. And when I started in the early 70s, 1974, I opened the seafood restaurant, which is still there on the quayside in Glasgow. I had absolutely no idea that the small restaurant, bistro style restaurant that I opened then would end up the way it has. And this was in the early 70s, and in fact, I'll just tell you this because I don't like fabricating the truth. I hadn't intended to open a restaurant at all. I had left university, and during my time at university, I'd run a mobile disco, and I had specialised in English literature at university. But I was much more interested in the mobile disco. And so when I left university with a third class degree, I don't even know that they award third class degrees anymore. Firsts plenty, seconds plenty, but thirds, they're a bit of a rarity. So I feel quite sort of privileged to have had such a low pass. And as such, I didn't really know what to do in my life. But the only thing, while I made up my mind what I was going to do, was I ran this disco after I'd left university. And I used to do the summer season in Cornwall, going around the county with the disco in the back of an old VW van, setting up in village halls. And in those days, interestingly, people didn't mind so much if there wasn't any alcohol, so I just used to also take a load of fizzy drinks, Coca-Cola and stuff, and sell them with crisps at the door. And I was quite happy doing that. I realised it wasn't going to be, my life's work, although I would have to put in at this place that I probably influenced my nephew, who's called Judge Jules, who used to be a DJ on Radio 1, to become a DJ in the next generation. But it was fun. But as I said, I didn't really think that it would end anywhere. And I found this nightclub on the quayside in Padstow, and I just thought, if only I could take over that nightclub, I'd have somewhere really special to carry on the disco. And at about the same time, I inherited some money from a great uncle of mine in Germany. I never even knew he existed. He left me about 12 grand, which doesn't seem a lot of money today, but in the early 70s it was a lot of money. And one of my friends, well actually my best friend, a guy called Johnny Water, had also recently been left a lot of money, so we got together and we bought this nightclub on the quayside in Padstow, and it was a disaster. The reason being that the only customers we seemed to be able to get into this nightclub were fishermen, right? And they weren't used to the drink, and they weren't used to the late hours, and we used to have lots of fights. And basically, me and my friend Johnny just could not keep order in this nightclub, and we got closed down by the police. The funny thing is that many of the customers, even the roughest customers, will now tell me that was the most gorgeous time in their life. They met their wife, met their husband, whatever, in this club. It lasted for 2 years. We were closed down. But basically, I had to come up with something to do. And after I'd left school, before I went to university, I did sign on for a hotel management course, and I'd spent 6 months learning how to cook in a proper kitchen. And because of that memory and because of that experience I'd had then, I turned the nightclub into a restaurant. And that's exactly how I started. I had no intention of doing it, but once I had started, I really enjoyed it. I really began to enjoy it. And I didn't hit on the idea of just specialising in seafood, particularly because it was a burning ambition at the time. I just did it because it was available. It was, the fish was just coming in literally off the fishing boats across the quayside, and it was the obvious thing to do. And I mean, much as I'd learnt about the running of a commercial kitchen, and also the basic techniques of cooking, I wouldn't describe myself as being a sort of like, very, at that time, a very experienced cook.
So I just cooked the stuff that my mother had cooked, my father had cooked, and I kept it simple. I kept everything simple. And it worked. It didn't work particularly. I mean, in the first years that we were open, there were many nights when we were shut, when there were no customers, we shut. And we used to close for 4 or 5 months during the winter. But gradually, I think just by sticking to local fresh seafood, we built up a reputation for, if not the most accomplished cooking, at least simple and honest cooking. And the other thing, and this is really a point which I always think matters an awful lot, it was quite a big restaurant. The club had been quite big. I actually converted the club into a restaurant because the club had no windows and was all soundproofed, and I opened it up and got builders to put in windows and all that. But it had about 80 seats, and it's a simple sort of economic fact that if you open a restaurant with 20 seats, 30 seats, you're hard pushed to ever make enough money to put any money aside to build up your business, simply because you just don't have enough bums on seats. So having 80 seats, unbeknown to me at the time, was, I think, the reason, that and the fresh fish, for our success. And gradually I built up the business over about, I suppose, 20 years. And it became quite a well-known local restaurant. We were lucky enough in the mid-80s to win so that was 10 years, we opened in 1975. We were lucky enough to win a competition in the Sunday Times, a competition where people wrote in and nominated their favourite restaurant, and that worked really well for us because we weren't making it in any of the food guides at the time, but we did have quite a lot of satisfied customers who wrote in and said, you ought to go and try this restaurant down in Padstow, it's rather good. And we got nominated in the Sunday Times for being the best restaurant in England at the time. And fortunately, I had friends that were in what is now called the media. In those days, we were in magazines, and they said, what you need to do is just write on a piece of paper the fact that you won this award and send it around to every newspaper, every radio station, every TV station in your area. And I did that, and I got loads of publicity from the BBC in Plymouth and ITV in Plymouth and all the local newspapers. And I was able to, on the back of it, really ramp up the trade in the restaurant. And after that, we were busy all the time. And even we started opening more and more during the season. And eventually, we ended up opening all the year round. And that was the first thing that sort of really, I hope I'm interested in you. I'm on for crazy about it. But that's the first thing that happened. And the second thing was just a piece of total luck, really, that on the back of this award, one of the TV journalists that came down mentioned to a TV director that she'd been down to this restaurant to have a look at it. It just won this award. Maybe you ought to sort of think, because this TV director at the time was working with a cook called Keith Floyd, and said maybe you ought to have a look at this restaurant. It might be worth thinking about going down to film there, okay? Now, you're probably too young to remember Keith Floyd, but if you can, you'll know that he was a bit of a special person at the time. This was like in the late 80s. He was the first male, I think not the first, but an early TV cook, and certainly the first person to actually cook on TV with sort of gusto, with a sense of humour, swigging wine as he was cooking. Sometimes he'd be cooking on the back of fishing boats, and other times even in a field somewhere with a barbecue, which was unheard of at the time. And his show just took off because it was the first time actually you see a man cooking. It had been Delia Smith before that. A man cooking, a man that was a bit disrespectful and a bit sort of like loved his food and, you know, could even be known to swear at times, that sort of person. And the director that was working with Keith Floyd was a director called David Pritchard, who did come down with Keith Floyd to my restaurant, and we did film together. And that was it, really. If you can, you know, in terms of promotion, and I'm talking to you as students, so what I'm saying has a certain sort of, you know, hope has a relevance. It's not just about learning how to cook and learning how kitchens work. It's also, if you're going to be restaurateurs, learning how to sell what you've got. And basically, right from an early age, sorry, in my cooking career, I just realized that it wasn't just about cooking. It wasn't just about serving nice food and having a good restaurant. It's also about selling your restaurant and making this contact with David Pritchard and subsequently filming with him was what really transformed my business from a single restaurant to where we are now. It's all about publicity, I have to say. About publicity and a love of what you do, and a feeling of enthusiasm and enjoyment in the whole business of hospitality. You know, it can be fun. It can be hard work, as you all know by now. But the main thing about it, I think, is that it's fun. It's fun to build up a business, and it's real good fun to actually get nice people into your restaurant and cook for them nicely and serve them nicely and have really good conversations with them. I would say that the biggest reward for me in hospitality is the friends I've made through serving them nice food. That, and also the relationships I've had with lots of hospitality staff. Sounds a bit rude, that. I don't mean sort of sexual relationships. I mean sort of good conversations and good times and sharing, working hard together. That's about all I've got to say. I hope you feel suitably inspired.
Some people would say to get there you need a stroke of luck, but you almost make your own luck sending around flyers and you can't just stand about and do nothing.
No,
I think do something to make that luck happen. I
think you do, but I think what it is knowing when you've got something to sell, you know, and knowing how to sell it. And it's sort of interesting that some time ago I did want to talk a bit about making TV for you. So here's a chance to bring this in. That some time ago I made a series called The Food Lover's Guide to Britain and Ireland. And we went around the whole country and around Ireland as well, just looking for small producers. Generally, people that had perhaps given up, I don't know, a job in education or advertising or something, and concentrating on sort of, I don't know, rearing chickens or growing organic crops. And we found this really interesting bunch of people, and it was very exciting and encouraging. But the one thing we realized all the way through is nobody knew how to sell anything, right? I mean, they produce these wonderful things, but that's not the whole point. You've got to actually tell people what you're doing and get them enthused about it. And I think that's what I'm saying to you. You know, you probably all want to go and open your own business. Put in a bit of time. We need good catering students in our business, in our industry, as you probably know. Find all of us that have restaurants and hotels are finding it incredibly difficult to recruit staff. I mean, it's partly, I think, because of the enormous success of the industry. That is the main reason that everybody wants to eat out now, and there's just not enough restaurants, hotel staff to go around. Everyone wants to go out and stay places. So it is a success story. But the other side of it, I think, is that catering's perceived as being hard work, and you know, there's this idea that your generation don't particularly like hard work, which is in my view, because I've got 3 sons and 2 stepchildren who all seem to work extremely hard, and in fact my stepdaughter is at Westminster College and really loves it and really likes the hard work. So it doesn't suit everybody, but I think for those that it does suit, it's a tremendous career. Am I rambling a bit? I probably am.
Shall we have time, if anyone's got any questions to ask?
Yeah, go on.
Feel free to put your hand up and we'll
Yeah.
ask away.
What is your favourite food to eat and what's your favourite food to cook?
The favourite food to eat and cook? Easy to answer that. Seafood, obviously. You haven't read your notes. But I mean, I think the thing by seafood, I mean like fish and shellfish. The reason I enjoy it so much is that there's a tendency with people not to really like fish. They find it bland, they find it boring, they don't like the smell, all that stuff. And therefore it's a challenge. It presents a challenge to a chef to actually find out, you know, what makes a piece of fish really, you know, the best way to cook a piece of fish and how to present fish and also how to buy fish. So I find it enormously challenging and enormously rewarding because, you know, there's a lot of expertise that goes into all foodstuffs. I mean, I wouldn't profess to be a great expert on choosing meat, all right? I know what I like and I can do a good enough job for my restaurants. But if you talk to me about fish, you know, I know what I'm talking about, and it's really good to be sort of to be confident about something that you do, you know, and the more confident you get, that's why I think for us in our particular business, teaching and training is so important, because it's not just that we want people to know what they're talking about, but we also realize that as people learn, they become more confident, and therefore the more confident you become about a job, the more you enjoy it. Right.
Was fish something that was forced upon you geographically because you were in Padstow, or is it something you liked before that?
Well, I did like it before that because my parents had a house in Cornwall ever since I was born. So, and they used to eat a lot of fish. And actually, my dad had a share in a lobster and crab fishing boat. So I was always used to it. What was the second part of the question? I'm talking too much. I forget what I was.
Or did you like fish before that?
Yeah, I did. I did.
You were eating
but
lobsters and crabs.
in terms of Cornwall in the 70s, it's really hard for you perhaps to realise this, but in the 70s you just could not get ingredients. You know, you virtually had to stick with what was local because you know, for example, if I wanted to put oysters, this was in 1974, 75, on my menu in Padstow. There were no oyster beds around Padstow then, there are now thankfully. I had to get the oysters from the south coast of Cornwall, but there was no transport. I had to get them sent up by train to Bodmin Parkway and then sent from Bodmin Parkway railway station to Padstow on the bus, right? And sometimes the bus drivers would refuse to take the oysters because they came in sort of cardboard parcels and they leaked. And the bus drivers complained that there was oyster juice all over the back of their bus. Now if I want oysters from the northwest of Scotland, or indeed Timbuk blinking too, all I do is ring up and they arrive. So really in the 70s, actually, you inevitably had to cook what was local. But that was a good education for me, or it wasn't an education, it was what you had to do. So I've always put what was local on my menu, and now of course it's very trendy and very correct to put local ingredients on your menu, but I did it just because I always had to.
Have you got another question?
Did you ever compete at the college in the culinary competition?
Could you say it again?
Did you ever compete at the college in the culinary competition?
No, I'd have failed. I'd have done terribly. I never did compete in culinary competitions. I probably wouldn't have done, but I always thought, oh, I think by the time that those sort of culinary competitions became common, that I was too busy cooking in my own kitchen. But interestingly, I've judged an awful lot of culinary competitions, including MasterChef in every other country in the world. Oh, Britain originally, but I've judged in Australia, I've judged in New Zealand, I've judged in Poland, right? In Gdansk, not Gdansk, sorry, Krakow in Poland, Polish MasterChef. I spoke in English, they all spoke in Polish. It's fabulous fun. That's
They're probably talking about you.
Incidentally, if you ever want to go to a wonderful undiscovered city, Krakow in Poland, trust me, brilliant.
Should we do one more question? Go on, Gia.
Two, because you... Go on then.
What's your favourite country to tour and why, and what do you learn from these experiences?
Favourite country to tour and why, and what have I learned? To be honest, I suppose every time I do a country, it presents a challenge, right? Some are sort of no-brainers, right? Touring in India is a no-brainer, right? There's so much going on there. There's so much great food there. You don't have to think. But alternatively, Greece, right? I mean, I know Greece. I started going there in my early 20s, and generally people regard Greek food as not the best. I found after my tour of India, I found myself touring in Greece and initially thinking this is going to be terrible. You know, it's so easy with curries and all that, and then getting into the food in Greece and suddenly realizing it's not what you perceive. It's a beautiful cuisine. It's very opposite the cuisine to that part of the world. The cooks there are as good as anywhere else, particularly the home cooks. And sort of as that realization grows, my own enjoyment grows. So I mean, what I'm saying from this is that anywhere I go to, I end up loving, you know. And I mean, I'm a case in point. We did a series called Long Weekends before the last one, which was Mexico. Going to Iceland, I didn't want to go to Iceland for a long week. I didn't want to go to Reykjavik, you know. I read up about the food in Iceland. I thought, I'm going to starve, it's so dreadful. And I got there, and of course there's very nice fish, fantastic cod, wonderful langoustines, which they call lobsters, and actually some really good cooks that are cooking, you know, very locally, correctly, and also some frightful stuff like stinky skate, which, you know, is great for TV because you eat it and it's disgusting and you virtually throw up and it makes everybody laugh. So I'm just saying that wherever you go, and I think it's all about having good research and good team, that you're always going to find stuff that's thoroughly enjoyable, and you're always going to have sort of nice things to say about a country. Because one of the things that we always find when we're filming is you start talking to local people about what they love to eat, and they just unfold. They just become very sort of passionate and very interesting. It's like talking to anybody about something that really interests them. It doesn't matter whether it's, stinky skate or the internal workings of a motorbike. It's still, once people are on something that interests them, they interest you.
What's the funniest thing that's happened to you in the kitchen?
Funniest? Depends which way you want to call funny. Well, I think the funniest was a sort of long running joke, which actually appeared in one of my earliest peer programs. As one of the sous chefs was called Paul Ripley, who my wife here remembers only too well, who was from London and worked in Padstow. And actually, when he left, after he left my restaurant, he went up, opened his own restaurant and got a Michelin star. He was that good. But he had this little habit of, he had this little plastic rat, which looked like a bloody rat, okay, which he'd keep putting around the kitchen. And I repeatedly found it. And in the end, I got the hang of it. But the first 2 or 3 times, it was like, oh, for sake, we're done for, like this. So that's funny. The worst thing happened quite recently, actually. Sass was with me. We were cooking on I was doing a demo on a boat in on the Saône near Lyon, and I had to do this cooking demo for I think it's about 123 people, and they told me at the last minute it'd be nice if everybody could get a chance to try some. And I'd said that it was going to be mussels because it was quite an easy dish to do. I think it was a dish that actually from my Long Weekends book with Bayonne ham and shallots. So basically just get your mussels, steam them open in a bit of white wine. You make chop up shallots and Bayonne ham and garlic and Finn's herb, Okay, Finn's herb, what's in Finn's herb? I better tell you then. Tarragon, chervil, parsley and chives. Chop them up, steam the mussels open, pass them through a colander, sweat off the shallots, add the Bayonne ham and the garlic, and then make a sauce with the mussel juice and a bit of chicken stock, and then just put everything together, and it's delicious because you've got this lovely mixture of very nice mussels and the Bayonne ham. And so I did this for 123 people, but I was flown in with Sass to Lyon, and that afternoon they took me to the kitchen on this. It's really interesting actually. They've got these enormous sort of like hotel like barges, but everybody they're all en suite and they're very luxurious, and they're buying into the sort of people of my age who retired and want to go on these sort of holidays, and basically they just meander down a river like the Danube or the Rhine or the Saône or the Rhone, and they stop off in places, and they get very well fed, and they get people like me to go in and talk to them. And I took them round the Lyon market, which was fab, really good fun, and then I had to do this demo. They took me into the kitchen and I met the chef, who was a lovely guy, very good cook, but Romanian, and didn't speak any English, nor did anybody else in the kitchen. So I was sort of trying to explain that I needed some fairly big boiling top to cook mussels for 123 people, and all they had was a tiny little, they were induction cookers, but only tiny bar top things. So I had to go ahead and start cooking these mussels with just this tiny source of power. And as the muscles started to open, the familiar smell of horse hit me. I can only describe muscles after they've gone still. And when you get out there into wherever you're going to work, if you ever smell that smell, just say, we're not sending these muscles out, right? Because as muscles, as they die, they smell, and once 2 or 3 of them in a batch have opened and start to smell, the rest of the batch smells like. Anyway, there I was, tiny little stove, and this terrible smell. And I just said, I'm sorry, I can't go on. I can't go on. I can't do these muscles. Because the other thing is that when muscles are dead, as they cook, they just disintegrate into little shreds, right? Not funny, but at last, because I've been asked that question for so long, and most of the time I've not had anything seriously bad, but that was seriously bad, wasn't it, Saz? And that was only last year, so.
Adam had a question about your recipes.
I watched your India tour.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, when you do these recipes and you put them in books, do you like tone down the spices at all?
No.
I was going to say, because there's a vindaloo recipe in there.
Oh, you haven't done that, have you?
We toned it down, but it's like 4 tablespoons of chili powder. You don't think, well, that can't be right. That cannot be right. We thought,
How come you would have found the one recipe in the book? It's not exactly wrong, but you're right, it is far too hot. Yeah. And basically, what happened with that vindaloo was that I was at the time very keen on trying to stick to one chili through most of the book, which is Kashmiri chilies. Those are the dried chilies, right? And actually, true Kashmiri chilies are not, they're hot, but they're not like massively hot, right? And I get them sent over from India and I grind them myself, right? And of course, when you grind them, I'm just using like a ordinary grinder. They grind quite coarsely, right? So when I tested the recipe, I was using Kashmiri chilies that I'd ground myself, and it was fine. But I kept getting these letters saying, there must be some mistake, surely. So in my little flat in London about 5 years ago, I went down the road and I just bought chili powder. And I made the dish. And it was like panic. Because if you use ordinary, red chili powder, it's far too hot. I'm sure we've changed it since then. I can only say I'm sorry.
I've got another question.
Yeah.
On the programme, you went to, I forgot where it was now, but you went to see someone called Rocky about his chicken korma.
Yeah.
What did you actually think of it? Because I remember watching it and sort of, it had a bit of a...
Well, it's funny you've got this on. There's another problem with that recipe. I don't know what. It's not actually, I love Rocky. He was just fabulous, him and his wife.
Yeah, he was very sort of straight to the point.
Yeah. Very rich, God. His family owned by far the most, because the Indians actually drink a lot of spirits. I mean, lots. And his family owns the most successful rum producing company in the country. So it's really well off, but very old money, really old style. So I remember his wife's called Rekha, and I said to Rocky, how long have you and Rekha been married? And they obviously got on very well. He said, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years. That's what it's like with marriage, it just goes on and on and on. But it was lovely. But I missed out intentionally. It was rather a complicated recipe for his korma, and I missed one phase out of it, which required some garlic and some ginger to be marinated. The chicken to be marinated in whizzed up garlic and ginger, because I just thought, well, it's too long. I mean, a lot of these Indian recipes are just too long. But he found out, he saw the recipe, and he wrote not And he came to the restaurant in Padstead, the seafood, and it was more in sorrow than anger, you know. He sent me this letter, and I was so embarrassed and felt bad about it that I changed the recipe. So if you find right, the new one has got the marination of the chicken back in there. But no, it's a good recipe.
Yeah.
But he's
Recipe, it's nice.
yeah. You met him? Oh, I loved him. He's just such a good guy, you know. So funny and sort of like up for it. And yeah, there you go.